first is why am I talking to you? What are my credentials? Just so you can have an understanding of where I come, what my experience has been, what my training has been, and how that affects what we'll talk about. The other thing that I'd like to start with, and I know there's some issues with confidentiality and all, is to start with your questions, and you can start doing that right now. A lot of you came in here today probably with some big questions in your mind. If you could put those in the chat now, that would be really helpful for me as I sort of shape what I'm doing to talk to you about. So the first thing, we're going to do questions. The other thing on questions is if you have a question while I'm presenting, it's actually best if you interrupt me so that I can address what you're talking about. I've been doing this work for a long time. So I may gloss over things that you may not know about, or your other folks on the line may not know about. So it's really important that you stop me or that you ask a question as soon as you can. If you're comfortable, raising your hand with the clicker here, or if you're more comfortable just putting in the chat, whatever you do, I'm going to ask you to do that as soon as you have a question. What we're going to address today, I'm going to talk about the changes, like how special education affects your kid when they turn 14. We're going to talk about transition planning. Also talking about the big thing is, sort of generally what I'm talking about is we know 14 is important, but 14 is also important because you got to be looking to adulthood. And I'm going to sort of go through all that with you. One is the issue of guardianship. I'm sure probably some of you are already freaked out over thinking about that, or maybe you aren't freaked out, and I will freak you out now. The issue around public benefits. How do we support people with disabilities as they become adults? What does that look like? We'll talk about advocacy, independent living, post-secondary education, employment, and then estate planning, which is also important that you should have those things in place when your kid's 14 and before. So now, I don't know if anybody is comfortable in asking any questions.
There's been a couple of the chat. And I'm not sure you saw them because I think you were logged out for a sec.
Yeah.
Some of the things families are looking for is a checklist, always helpful with kids turning 14 in terms of things that need to be done or be mindful of.
Yeah.
Again, generally interested in what sorts of issues and deadlines to be paying attention to. Great questions. And then the third one that came in was the mass requirements to graduate. Requires 2 years of foreign language. Just special education kids have an exemption, which, great question I've ever heard. Not sure we can even address that today, but those are the three that came into the chat.
Well, thank you. What does your screen look like from what I'm showing? Is it the mess that I have up here or no?
It is. It'd be right before this, it was the slideshow, but now you're in the kind of your view, like there you go.
Oh, maybe let me screen I'm sharing. Okay. So first about me, this is my family, and I think that's my biggest credential to speaking to you today. My oldest son has Down syndrome, and he is now 38. He's turning 39 in a few weeks. So I have a lot of experience. I know where you are. I'm also, I've been around a long time. I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing law. I've been practicing disability law for about 25 years. I've been practicing law for actually a lot longer than that. I was also in the state legislature. So I was actually involved when we changed the age to 14 for transition. I've been involved in a whole lot of special education, disability policy, a lot of laws, the Real Lives Bill, the inclusive concurrent higher education, changing the name of the department, which has been changed for a long time. All those things I was involved with in the legislature. I also have a PhD from Brandeis in disability, it's in social policy, but my focus was on individuals with intellectual disabilities as they transition into college and adulthood. That's my ultimate expertise. And my latest endeavor is that I have a nonprofit website, specialneedstrustonline.com, which is a link there. And what that does is it allows families who have a family member with a disability to get special needs trusts, wills, powers of attorney, and all that at a sharply discounted price from what you would get from an attorney. It works like LegalZoom. So you just go on, you answer some questions, and then it'll, you pay the price and it'll send you the filled out documents the way they're supposed to be in just about a minute. So it's super easy to use, and it's a great option for some folks. And I'm going to pause again. I don't think anybody's going to have any questions on this one. I'm going to start with special education law because 14 is the magic age. You all have been through hold on here. You've all been through the magic age when your child turned 3 and came out of early intervention and then transitioned into special education. 14 is the next big milestone. The first thing is that the law recognizes when a kid is 14 that they are becoming an adult. That's the age where we're thinking about they're no longer really children. They're starting to become adults, and the law treats them as that, and that's really important. The first thing is that they have the right to participate in their IEP meetings, which is huge. And the second, I'm going to jump down in this. Not only do they have the right to participate, is they need to actually understand and have the opportunity to participate in what they're doing. What you will find is, for those of you who haven't been through this, is that sometimes this isn't handled as good as it should by special educators and by the team itself. The big issue is that it's usually glossed over in a very quick way. It's sort of what can happen during an IEP meeting is that the person running the meeting is essentially checking the boxes to make sure they're doing everything. And this is one of the boxes that must be checked. But I think it's important as parents to make sure that your kid understands that they have the ability to be involved in this, and that they have the right to understand what everybody is talking about, and that their input counts as part of the team. So that's something to think about if you're going to a team meeting. That's once your kid turns 14, so 14 and on, that's what the law is. And they really should be involved in that process, and they have the right to do that. The other thing is at 14, we begin the transition services, is that where is the student going? And really in transition, you need to be thinking about, not about turning 15, but where is this kid going to be as an adult? What does adulthood look like for this person? Are they going to go on to college? Are they going to go on to vocational school as high school? Are they going to go to community college? Are they going to learn a trade? Are they going to need job supports? Everything that they do, you need to be thinking about as that transition services. The other piece is, ideally, what you're thinking about is, what will this person's life look like when they're an adult? What is your expectation for them? What is their expectation for them? Do they expect to live on their own in their own apartment? How do they expect to do that? That's really where you start, is where is the vision for them being an adult? And then you need to work backwards to say, how do we get there? And I'm going to pause again.
No questions?
I'm actually, there's still more. We
Oh,
do
okay.
have that question. I don't know what the answer is on that, the language requirement. They also need to talk Somehow I got muted. I don't have the answer to the question on the graduation requirements. But you need to talk about that, needs to come up in that, in when the kid turns 14. You need to talk about the graduation requirements. You also need to talk about vocational education. If you read the Globe, there's been a lot of articles about students with disabilities being denied access to vocational education. Like I said, I have a son who has a disability. And I can remember clearly he actually ended up going to a vocational school, and they didn't want him to go there. They were so concerned about SAWS and everything else. So it was really a fight to get him into a vocational school. Apparently that's going on, and it's, you know, rampant across Massachusetts. But just know that your kid has a right to attend vocational school. That can be really important for kids that really need to get a skill before they move on.
We did have a question that came in the chat.
Okay.
For a 14-year-old who might not understand the complexities of the IEP, do you have any advice on how to approach their participation in the process?
Well, I guess it's like you do with anything, right? First, you talk to them before you go in on what's happening, explain what it's going to look like, because you've been, if your kid's 14, you have already been through quite a few IEP meetings. That's overwhelming for, I think, every parent. And if you can imagine being the 14-year-old coming in, you'll have a list of who's going to be at the IEP meeting. So, and your kid's going to know most of those people because they're the people that he or she works with. So explain to them. And then just explain as simply as possible that the purpose of the meeting is to make sure that you get the education you need. And you should talk to the kid before you go in, is what would you like to get out of your education? What do you think is important? What would you like to learn about? All those questions, and you may have to give them options like whatever you can think of. You know your kids the best, so whatever you think it's important to help them through. I would suggest that really pretty much no matter where your kid is intellectually, that you need to have this conversation with them. And they need to be invited to this process. And I would strongly suggest that your kids go to this. I think that the biggest part of this is that your kids are going to need to learn to advocate for themselves in environments that they're not comfortable in, right? And I think this is the first opportunity that this kid is going to get a chance to advocate for themselves in a very formalized, structured place. So if the kid can come in and maybe the kid's going to say, I want to play video games all day. That's an important thing that the team should take into consideration. So your kid doesn't have to be the special ed lawyer going in there. Your kid has to be themselves, and they have to say what's important for them. And whatever it is, they have the right to say that, and the team should be addressing it. If there's any other questions, you can just put them in the chat as well. Then they also have access to any assistive technology. So whatever they need to do to be involved in that as well. And then parental involvement, I'll get more of that later on. Any other questions? I gotta find my mouse here, okay. The biggest thing that and what I talked about before is this issue of transition planning. What is your kid, what is your vision? What is their vision of being an adult? What does that look like? What do they want to learn? Do they want to be, a landscaper? Do they want to be involved in medicine? What are they really interested in? And then you need to work backwards and figure out how to do that. What are work with the you know, what kind of, suppose they want to be involved in veterinary medicine. Well, what does that entail? They should be taking science courses. They should be taking things that that are going to help them do that. Maybe they should have some type of internship in a veterinary hospital. Maybe they should be doing, maybe it should be as simple as dog walking activities. But whatever it is the kid wants, you need to work backwards to get them and make sure that they're getting the training that they need. I also talked about independent living, and I think a lot of times, I think this is where we get a fall down. And I see it a lot when kids are turning 14 is they'll say, well, they need life skills. And everybody needs life skills, right? We all need life skills, but just because you're getting life skills doesn't mean you don't get math and science. That's the problem. What I see, my experience is, and usually I only see the bad things, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. I'm a lawyer. People don't come to me and tell me how great their special education system is and how great services are their kids getting. They come when the system's completely falling apart. So I have a very warped view of special education in a lot of ways, because I only really see, my experience is typically only the bad stuff. But you need to make sure that they're getting all the skills they need. Life skills are extremely important, but so is academic skills or vocational skills. All that needs to be in together. And I'll pause again for a second while I. No questions. The next big thing is actually preparation for 18. And we're gonna, I guess, maybe it's next week. I don't know when we do 18, but there's another webinar on turning 18. The issue, as you probably all know, when your child turns 18, they're a legal adult. So they have the right to enter into contracts, right to marry, they have the right to do anything they want. They are legal adults, and you're no longer responsible for them or their decisions. They have the ability to do that unless they are under a guardianship. I think the pressure on a lot of families that you'll see as your kid gets older is there's a lot of pressure to put your kid under a guardianship. I remember when my kid was turning 18, DDS came in and were essentially telling us, you have to put him under a guardianship. And we were saying, well, I'm versed in this. If I hadn't studied this and worked in this area, I would have agreed with them. But they were essentially demanding that we put him under guardianship. You don't have to put a kid under guardianship if they have any way to make decisions for themselves. The alternative to that is to do a power of attorney. The kid actually issues you a power of attorney on their 18th birthday and issues you a healthcare proxy. Power of attorney is it's a legal document that anybody can create who's a legal adult that gives someone the right access to their financial records, to make decisions for them, to do all that. Some of you bought a house, you may have given the power of attorney to a lawyer to actually act for you in the closing. But so what my son did is he issued a power of attorney to me and my wife, giving us full legal authority to act for him. By doing that, he still has the power to act for himself. For example, when he rented an apartment, he signed the lease. He was the one responsible. Healthcare proxy is another complicated thing. And part of most of the healthcare proxy also has a term in it that says it's not going to, you can discuss the child or the person's healthcare information. There's a law which is HIPAA, which you're probably all aware of, where a doctor can't discuss your case with anybody else. So that the challenge is, if your kid has a disability and they haven't issued a healthcare proxy, the doctor really can't talk to you. My experience is that frequently doctors will just sort of let that go, but legally they're not supposed to. So if your kid issued you a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy when they turn 18, you'd be able to assist them and support them in their decisions. That's how it's worked for us. So for my son, we've been working under this for 20 years and we've never had an issue. The issue with guardianship is you actually have to go to court. The judge then determines whether the person turning 18 is able to make decisions. And then if they feel they're not, they're going to put them under a guardianship. I do this in my practice as well. There are people that need a guardianship. Not everybody can do a power of attorney, but I think that line is somewhere not where most people think. I'll share some numbers, and that a lot of folks use IQ as intelligence, right? And typically around guardianship, that it sometimes comes in there still. But for example, in my family's case, for my son, he tested out at like a 53, which is, but he's very capable in a lot of ways. He knows how to make decisions. He makes important and good decisions. But if we went to court to put him under a guardianship, I'm sure the court would have done it. My experience is that the courts don't have the experience around this field that they should, that the doctors don't have the experience around this field that they should. And I think that even on the team, the special ed folks that are sitting around that table, they haven't really been prepared to help make these decisions either. I'm currently involved with a major national research project where we're exploring guardianship, the results of guardianship, and what are the levers that cause a family or a person to end up under guardianship. These are all big issues that we're looking at. And what I described is what the research is now showing, is that these people aren't prepared. The people that are working with your kids don't understand all of what it means to be a person with a disability turning 18. The other research says that if you are under a guardianship, you're less likely to be independent, you're less likely to advocate for yourself, you're less likely to do all these things. And really, the guardianship can have a detrimental effect on a person if they don't need it. Any questions on that?
I actually have a question.
Okay.
Since we do a lot of consults at our family support center, healthcare proxy. I've heard different things. So if an individual decides to, give a healthcare proxy permission, right? Does it have to be enacted by a doctor for them to list, to be able to share information with that parent, the healthcare proxy themselves? I hear conflicting things about that.
So if a person, suppose I issued you a healthcare proxy for me,
Mm-hmm.
the terms of the healthcare proxy that I would issue you says, you have the right to talk to Andrea about my condition. Does that answer your question? So once I give it to the doctor, they have the right to talk to you about my healthcare decisions.
So it doesn't have to be signed off by a doctor, that it's enacted? Because it's the twofold. So I guess it's, the questions we get. So that would be in a case, say if I was you were my healthcare proxy and I got into an accident and didn't have any capacity, you would automatically help make my decisions.
Yes.
Is there two pieces to this? The first piece is I'm giving you permission, or I'm giving the doctor to talk to you about my health, even if I'm not. So it doesn't have to be signed off by a doctor. It only has to be signed off. This is the conflict. We hear this constantly.
No.
Okay.
So if you go into anybody who's been into a doctor or had a medical procedure recently, or even not so recently, before you go in, and I'm of the age where I have lots of those now, before you go in, they'll say, do you have a healthcare proxy? And if you do not have one, they're going to stick one right in front of you, right as you're standing there, and say, you got to sign this, you got to do this now, because they don't want to be stuck with you with nobody to make healthcare decisions for you. What happens in that case is that the hospital is going to have to go to court and get a judge to appoint a guardian for you to make decisions for you if you didn't do that. And that's going to be a pain for them. That's why they're shoving that thing in front of your face saying, sign this, or we're not gonna do what we said we were going to do unless you sign it. I hope that's clarifying.
I
Not
think so.
confusing.
So that document, again, and you don't have to go through a lawyer to do it. You can get them, there's different places to get them. So,
Yep,
I
yep.
mean, it kind of, there's different forms or whatever. And at the bottom, the person would sign it, you would sign it. But isn't there a physician's signature there too? No, there isn't.
No,
Okay.
no physicians, no,
Great.
no.
All right. Thank you for clearing that up,
Yep,
because I
yeah,
do,
yeah.
there's a couple of people mentioned it, yes, recently, like it has to be enacted for it to be used. So I'm like, that's not what I,
No, it's
just-
not, there's nowhere on it for that.
all right.
This is on the website, the site that I put on the bottom of every page, specialneedstrustsonline.com. And no, there's an S after trust because I had this website for a few years, and I guess it was so good that someone actually copied it and used Special Needs Trust Online. They don't do the same thing, but somehow they thought it was good, I guess. Anyway, any other questions on this? I see there was another one that popped up on the chat, but I didn't click on
It
it.
was a clarifying question to the other.
Okay,
one. Yep, we're good for now.
okay. Where am I for time? Oh, I'm good. The other thing you need to think about in the transition to adulthood is the issue around disability benefits. There's two major benefits for someone with a disability. One is Social Security disability insurance, and that has to do with someone who has worked and gotten so many quarters. I don't know how many quarters you need to be. I don't have the exact number, but has to have worked for a certain time period and then became disabled or was disabled even while they were working. They're allowed to collect what's called SSDI. Most people with significant disabilities, typically they're not able to work that much or make that much money. And they apply for what's called supplemental security income, SSI. You're going to hear these, if your kid's turning 14, you're going to be hearing these terms a lot over and over again. If you actually go to the website, the specialneedstrustsonline.com, one of the features on the site is there's a little search bar that says search this site. You can just click on that. If you type in like SSDI, SSI, you'll get a little brief article about giving you all the description about what the difference is, how they work, what it's all about. But it's really important that you be prepared, because when your kid is beginning to turn 18 and before they're 18, you should be applying for these benefits for them, okay? And it depends on your family income. If you are on a low income family at this point, your kid with a disability may be eligible for SSI now. Typically SSI kicks in at 18 when the child is a legal adult. But if you are a low income family, that child with a disability may be eligible for SSI before the age of 18. So that's another thing to think about. There's another thing popped up in the chat. I think I see a number 8.
We're kind of chit-chatting about something else, so
Oh.
not about
I'm gonna
that. So
keep you after school if that's going to keep up.
yeah, no. So some clarifying questions.
The next one is advocacy, and I talked about that already. One of the things is it's important for parents to really be informed. The fact that you're on this call is you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're learning all about what you need to advocate for your child. I know, I'm a lawyer. I've been doing this for years, but there's, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal special education law. There's different, you can go to like Wright's Law or I don't have a lot of special ed stuff on my website. But, you know, search around. The law, it's not that challenging the law itself. It's not that difficult, but you need to know what it says. I'll digress a bit. I just did a special education case for a family with a kid with a significant disability. The parents are super educated people. They're you know, professors at the top schools in the country. And their kid has a significant disability. They always felt that the school district was being nice to them, and they were happy with the school district because they were allowing their kid to go to school and do all these things, until, of course, things went bad and they had to hire me. But the fundamental thing that they did not understand, even as super educated people, is that your kid, no matter what their disability is, has a right to an education that's going to move that kid forward where that kid should be. And when the school district starts giving you the, you know, the stop on the at the IEP meetings, or we can't do that, that's not the case. It's the law says that your child with a disability has the right to be educated, the right to be educated with their peers, and the right to get an appropriate education. That's really powerful. Prior to about 1974, if your kid had a disability, there was no right to an education. Like from my generation, when I went to school, I remember clearly in grammar school, because you start out in first grade, if there were kids that you know, some kids with disabilities didn't even make it to the first grade. They were already out. But then there were kids that came in with me in first grades that all of a sudden were getting kicked out of school because the teachers couldn't handle them or whatever. So prior to 1974, that was the law. You had no right to an education at all if you had a disability. School district could just say, no, you know, we can't educate you. We don't know what to do with you. That's not the law now. When you show up at your local schoolhouse with a kid with a disability, the school district has to educate your kid. There's no question. You know, that's a giant leap in the law that I can't imagine how they actually successfully did that. But that leap is what the world that you are in, the legal world now, is. You absolutely, your kid absolutely has a right to an education, and really a great education that's going to get them where they're supposed to be. The other thing for you to know, which I also hear from my clients, is, oh, that's going to be so expensive. You know, the school district's not going to want to do that. The law is very clear that money is no object. If your kid's going to cost the school district, you know, $300,000 to educate your kid, they better do it because they're required by the law to do it. So you as a parent should never be considering or thinking that this kid is too expensive for the school district. That kid has a right to an education. And we as a society decided that that's the way we're going to do it. And it's not going to matter what the amount of the price tag is for that.
We do have a question that came in.
Okay.
If a child is on SSI now and wants to start working part-time upon turning 14, would it affect his SSI?
I would think probably not, but you'd have to go through Social Security, and they're sometimes terrible to deal with. I know as an adult, if you work, it's like, I think for every dollar you make, you lose 50 cents on your SSI. So it's some kind of metric like that. So I would presume it's the same for a 14-year-old. And I thought you had to be 16 to work. I'm not even up on those child laws at this point.
Right.
Any other questions on that? The other thing that I bolded here is you got to teach your child to advocate for themselves. That's like one of the number one things you got to do. And probably the most important thing in preparing your kid for adulthood is they need to figure out if they have a problem or they don't like something, how do they address it? That's super important. You know, and our kids coming out, like if your kids, we're talking about 14-year-olds and maybe people with a developmental disability or an intellectual disability that may be, not advancing as quickly as other individuals, that their advocacy at this point may be, they'll be calling them behaviors. If the kid doesn't like something, they're running away or they're doing something else. The part of advocacy is teaching that kid, if things have gone bad, what do they need to do to help themselves? Is it asking for help? Is whatever it is. And typically if you're at IEP and they're talking about your kid's behaviors, your kids' behaviors in a lot of ways, they're attempting to advocate for themselves because they're not liking something that's happening. And I don't have an easy answer for that, but you need to continue to teach that kid to do that in a way that's going to be meaningful and get the results the kid wants. Any other questions on that? We're good to go. We talked about this, but with life skills is what I said before, cooking, cleaning, finances, getting involved with community organizations. Those are things, your kid around the house should be doing things that all kids do to help out, if they can. But the home is a great place to start that, how do you work? And this is, as my experience now, is not only for kids with disabilities, how to use the washing machine, how to use the dryer, how to cook, how to do all those things. Your kid with a disability needs them more because it's probably going to be more challenging for them to learn to do those skills. But all kids need to do that. It's just one of those things that happen. And when you're, like I said, when you're looking at the IEP and you're looking at the kid's progress, you need to, if the kid's going to live by themselves as an adult, or even in some type of group situation, they're going to need to do their laundry, to clean, to cook, to do whatever it is they need to do, that they should be learning that now as younger children. Post-secondary education, well, I already talked about vocational training, that your kid has the right to go to a vocational school. The other alternative, or one of the great thing, is the community colleges and the types of training that you can get at community colleges, either for credit or not for credit. They're a phenomenal thing. The community colleges in Massachusetts are set up to be within a close distance of everybody in the state. And I'm sure in your catchment area, there's probably a few community colleges. They have tremendous opportunity for kids. And then as well as a four-year university. One of the things is in Massachusetts, a law was just passed and signed into law in August of this year. Actually, it was July of this year. Of last year, that opened up all public colleges and universities to individuals with disabilities. What the law says is that if you have a disability that would include an intellectual disability or developmental disability, autism spectrum, and because of that disability, you are unable to pass MCAS and therefore graduate, that you have the right to attend any Massachusetts public college or university. The way the system works is that your kid would have to be accepted, but they can't deny the kid acceptance because of the disability or the failure of MCAS or because of all those other things. There are limitations. They have to be accepted by the school, by the college, but typically the criteria for acceptance, there's two major criteria that the colleges and universities tend to look at. One is how much does that kid want to be there and learn from attending a college? And are there any sort of underlying behavioral issues that could complicate that kid's presence on campus. But the way the system works now in Massachusetts, we probably, through a grant program before this was signed into law, there's probably been 2,500 students have gone through a program that was formerly called Macy, including them on college campuses with tremendous results. Bridgewater State, and I think a few of the other colleges now are offering them to live in the dorms. They go to regular classes. They have the support through disability services that they need, but they have full access to college life in the whole process. So it's a tremendous opportunity. Massachusetts is the first state in the country to do that, and you should know about that now. And if you have a kid with an intellectual disability or on the spectrum who may have significant challenges, who you think may benefit for that, and you can talk to your kid about that too. Bring it up in your IEP meeting at 14 and say, look, we want this kid to attend college. And they will all look at you and say, no. My expectation is they would say that, but they may say yes, but it doesn't matter because the kid has a right to do that. So, and since the kid has a right to do it, they should be preparing for the kid to get there. One of the other questions, now I can go back to that thing about the question about the language requirement, 2 years language. So it doesn't matter if you're able to pass to meet those requirements to attend a Massachusetts public college or university if you have a disability under this law. So that is not a barrier to them attending college. Typically, they're attending these colleges. Typically, what my experience is that typically a student, like a student with an intellectual disability or a significant disability, is usually taking 1 or 2 classes a semester, because that's a lot to handle for someone with a disability, for the amount of energy and effort it's going to take. And typically they're taking classes in like an audit status. That's the way it typically works. But what we saw through the grant program was that students would come in under that status and then be able to actually pass MCAS and then be as a regular matriculating student. So you don't know until the kid is there on how far they can go.
Okay, we have 2 questions that came in about that. First one, with the new law, is it reasonable to expect that all kids with severe disabilities have the right to attend college? And if so, are there going to be any independence or behavioral criteria that students need to meet?
So the law says that each college and university gets to make their own admission standards. The admission standards are typically not issues of like intellectual, right? Someone with a significant intellectual disability is still probably going to come in if they meet the 2 criteria, because I was involved in this process. The 2 biggest criteria is, does the kid want to go? Like, how motivated is the kid? That's a major factor. The other factor that freaks out some colleges is there like a behavioral issue, like where the kid can be violent? That's usually that's a big deal, but I'm actually working with a family now. It's like I said before, typically these behaviors are because the kid's trying to advocate for themselves about something that they don't like or they don't want to do. So you need to address that issue rather than everybody gets mad. Some people really act out in ways, like a lot of adults without disabilities do those things. So it is not necessarily a disqualifying factor, is my answer, I guess.
Okay, and the second question, if they fail MCAS, they won't get a diploma. Will the college accept them without a diploma?
The college cannot accept them without a diploma, but they will allow them to attend classes and take classes without that. And like I said before, we've had a lot of cases where the kid went to college without the diploma and actually was able to back it, actually then made the the qualifications for high school graduation, where actually there's a lot of that thinking, you know, is you come in and you can get it afterwards. That's something that is happening. But they still have the right to take all these classes and do whatever they need to do. I use that example of veterinary, you know, someone who wanted to be a vet or working with animals or something. So the typical thing would be to attend a college that had classes in that area and learn about that. That would be great for a student doing that. When I was in the State House, we had a few, actually three, well, two individuals working as paid staff who had been through that college program where they, like a lot of times they'll take public speaking, they'll take history, I had a student taking special education law. They're learning a lot and they're learning skills to be successful in a job, like every other kid who goes to college, right? So we're seeing them come out with a lot of skills to get a job in a place that we don't typically see a kid with an intellectual disability, right? Someone working in an office or in an advocacy role at the State House. That's not what we had imagined people with intellectual disabilities would be doing in the past.
And then a secondary question to that last one. If they were able to go to the college without the diploma, will they get credit is the question.
They may or they may not, depending on the class.
Even if they don't have a diploma?
I'm sorry?
Even if they don't have a diploma? Depending on the
Yes.
class. Okay.
Yes, because it says, the language says for credit or non-credit. So, and I don't know why that language stuck in my head. I don't remember hardly anything, but I do remember that. So they could take credit classes for credit.
But just to be clear on that, but they can't matriculate into a degree, is that right? If they don't have their diploma?
Only if they meet the qualifications for that.
Got it. Okay, any other questions on that? All right, so far so good.
Employment is another thing. You know, there's all sorts of opportunities for employment, like through folks you may know that know your kid. Also start working with your school districts and saying, look, we want this kid to have this type of experience, this work experience. And then if it's with vocational school or whatever, they should be giving that type of work experience for your kid moving forward. Community research resources, disability organizations like the one you're involved with now. You already know that one. It's a great resource. The Department of Developmental Services, DDS, as you move through this process, they will be involved in that process, in the educational process, to see essentially who's coming up in the pipeline. DDS serves people with intellectual disabilities, as well as people on the autism spectrum who do not have an intellectual disability. You know, some people on the autism spectrum have an intellectual disability and autism. Others just have autism. DDS in the past, like, I don't know how many years, 3 or 4 or 5 years, has actually more than 5 years at this point, has begun serving individuals with autism spectrum only and not with an intellectual disability. They got special money to do that. Mass Rehab is the vocational rehabilitation services. They provide training for individuals with disabilities to get jobs. Independent living centers are a great resource for anyone. They're, I don't know, Andrea can probably help you out where your local independent living center is. They can help your kids out at this age. They can do a lot of, they help with, like, if you have a disability, how to get an apartment, how to advocate for yourself. They do trainings, they do hands-on stuff, they do everything. So they're a great resource. Any other questions on that? Oh, the last thing is to do the estate planning for yourself. If you have a kid with a disability, you should have these things in place to do this. One is a letter of intent. These, I'm going to send, Andrea, I'll send you a PDF of this. On the PDF, they'll have these blue links are live. So when you get the PDF, that you'll just be able to click on these links and it'll bring you to an explanation. And I'm going to go through really quickly now. I have to go through really quickly. A letter of intent is just like an instruction manual for your kid. Who are their friends? Who are their doctors? What's your vision and their vision for their adulthood? But it's so, if you're gone suddenly, someone can just pick up that document and say, oh, this is what we got to do for this kid. So that's on the website too. If you click on that, it's free. You just download the form and then you just fill it out. Last will and testament, I think everybody knows what a will is. When you die, it's the document that says where your stuff goes. The special needs trust is a trust that's specially designed so that your kid can still get SSI benefits and government benefits, as well as inherit money from you. So that's critically important. Power of attorney, everybody should have a power of attorney. Because like I said, if you're like, for me, if I was to become disabled and I hadn't given anybody the power of attorney, someone would have to go to court and get a guardianship for me before they could touch my bank accounts, before they could do anything for me. So that's, you need that. Healthcare proxy is the same. ABLE account is, you set them up through Fidelity in Massachusetts. There's a link if you click on that too, that brings you to the Fidelity website. The ABLE account allows the person to have up to $100,000 in the ABLE account and not count against SSI, so they can continue to get government benefits. And that's it.